Hello and welcome to Let's Talk. I'm John Kane. I'm your host. And as always, I'm happy to be here. Happy to have a conversation that you might not normally have. Maybe interject a few things, add a few thoughts, a little perspective that you may not have considered. And that's what the show is all about. But it's also all about hearing from you. So we are going to go to your calls probably earlier than we usually do. No guest today. And again, we do bid a fond farewell to Shawnee Rice. Starting in February, I'll introduce you to my new co-host, and we'll go from there. But we'll ride out this month with just me, basically, and you, the callers. Before I get into the subject, and you'll understand why I played Someday I'll Never Learn when I get to the subject matter. A few things I want to do first off. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, I am screening Indian Horse downstairs at the Brooklyn Commons, 388 Atlantic Avenue. That's January 30th at 7 p.m. We try to get started right at 7 p.m., so we have time to talk about it afterwards. And this is a powerful film. It is, it's pretty much almost a true-to-life circumstance that existed with residential schools and what kids went through and what the schools were all about. And of course, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of stories there. And there are many residential schools throughout Canada and the U.S. But many of the stories have similar, have a similar theme. It was always about dominating children, assimilating children, and abusing children. And so when I'm hoping you can come join me. I've only been able to find a couple of good films that address the residential school issue, and this is one of them. And I think if you come out watching the film, seeing a little bit of that experience, even if it's a dramatization, will perhaps spark a few more questions and more conversation, and that's what we do there. So the event is a WBAI event. We put out a donation basket so we can take contributions to WBAI. I'll probably produce a bit of a promo and have it played probably starting next week. I don't usually do it until about a week before we get started. But again, this is going to be my first of my monthly events that I try to do every month, depending on schedule. And look forward to this. This is a very good film, and I think you'll really be taken by it. I want to remind people that even though this show streams live at WBAI.org, so you can listen online, even if you're outside of the New York City listening area, obviously, we're 99.5 on the FM dial. We do stream video of the show on Facebook. So if you happen to be listening and you're wondering what it looks like, well, we're in our new studio too, so we kind of got a new look. You can find us on Facebook. We share this thing on a bunch of Facebook group pages. We start off on the Facebook group page associated with the show, which is Let's Talk with John Kane on WBAI. So you can find that group page. I share it across a bunch of Facebook groups that I'm involved in. But I also take the audio of the show and I put it up on SoundCloud so it goes out as a podcast. I take the video of the show from my Facebook live streaming and I put it up on YouTube so it goes up as a video. You can find my podcast by searching Let's Talk Native with John Kane podcast. And you can ask Alexa or whoever, you can just search it online. And we are pretty much on all of your favorite podcast platforms. So I encourage you to look for this show and my show from back home, which is called Let's Talk Native. That's why I use the name. I put both shows up. Shows back home are 1 hour shows, so they're a little bit shorter. And then, of course, these ones are 2 hour shows, which have a lot of you on them. So, so by all means, check them out. Look, I also on YouTube, I also put the short form videos that I create. And as I mentioned last week, I've got a new video that came out. It's called "We Are Not Your Mascot." I really encourage you to take a look at it. If you didn't understand what the Native perspective is on the mascot issue, if you're confused by it at all, you can at least hear how I explain it, and it has been an important way of explaining it. In fact, I was a part of helping a school change its mascot, where the school board voted 7-0 unanimously to retire their we call the R word or the R slur, or whatever you want to call it, name for Lancaster High School in Western New York, and now they are the Lancaster Legends, with a knight as their as their mascot. But I was a part of that change, and it was a public debate. It was on radio and television and in newspapers. It also played out at school board meetings and that kind of thing. But this video, I think, captures what I think are some of the unique arguments that I make. I connect it to the residential schools. I connect it to the American author L. Frank Baum, author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and his call for the annihilation of Native people, partially because he didn't want us to ruin the image that white people created of us for us. So he thought it was better that we die and that we live in history, the history that they create, and then they can make mascots out of us. So I bring up those two issues that aren't. It's not always something that people present in that discussion. So that's kind of my. And I'm not saying it's totally unique, but those are two of the issues that I bring up, and of course some of the obvious ones. But again, go to my YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I've got a bunch of, again, all the shows that I do here and back home. But if you scroll down, you'll see I have a series of short form videos. I got one on Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the Doctrine of Discovery, Columbus in his own words, which is probably the most widely viewed video that I have. A bunch of explanations about various things like the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. I've got a couple of them on the Doctrine of Discovery. But by all means, check them out. And I'd love to have some of your feedback, especially when you get to call into this show and talk about it. Let me see, what else I got here? Hey, just prior to coming on, listening to the replay of Democracy Now!, I was listening to the Poor People's Campaign, Reverend Barber. I'm working with a part of the Poor People's Campaign also. There's an effort this spring in particular to make the clear connection between the doctrine of Christian discovery and the imposition of poverty, especially on Native people. But you can't associate poverty, I mean, you can. There's a direct line in connecting poverty with the stripping of land ownership, and that's what the doctrine of Christian discovery was all about, as well as domination and jurisdiction and all kinds of other stuff. But the Poor People's Campaign is working, and we're going to have a big spring meeting up in Potsdam, New York, and I'll be one of the presenters up there talking about the doctrine of Christian discovery, and that's going to be one of the themes that this thing is based on. So just kind of adding on to what Reverend Barber and Amy Goodwin were talking about in the previous hour. One other thing I guess I'll mention is that, as always, we are in need. We are in need of your support, and we look to you to support this listener-sponsored radio. So I have to encourage people to again, continue to go to the pledge line, 516-620-3602. There, you can make a donation, a one-time donation. You can become a WBAI buddy, a BAI buddy as we call it. You can also go online to do this. You can go to www.give2, that's GIVE, the number 2, WBAI.org, and follow the steps there. There's prompts that you can follow through. And again, I would greatly appreciate that when you make a donation to WBAI, you do it in the name of this show. It doesn't come to me, but it sends a message to management that you listen to the show, that you appreciate the conversations that we have, even the tougher ones that we have. But you appreciate the conversations that we have, and that in sponsoring WBAI, you also want to give a little bit of a pat to Let's Talk with John Kane. So I'd appreciate that. Let me see what else. Look, if you also, I guess I have to say, because a caller specifically mentioned that there may very well be listeners who don't want to be on a list. They don't want to be a buddy. They don't want to give all of their information to make a donation. So here's what you do: you go down to the post office, and for $1 or so, you can get a postal money order. You don't even have to fill out that it's from you. Just put in, what do we got? Pacifica, WBAI. Put it in the mail. Mail it to 388 Atlantic Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, 11217. So that's 11217. So you can send, you can send a check. But if you want to be anonymous, just go to get a money order and just don't fill out your name. If you want to do an anonymous donation, then you will. That's one true way to be anonymous, and you will not be in the system. So that's just another way that you can support what we do here. All right. So look, I usually have a specific Native topic that I talk about here, but because we are in the silly season of election 2020. And watching some parts of the debate and some of who's running, I just have to mention a few things. There's two candidates that have made some sort of impact or statement when it comes to Native people. Obviously, you got Elizabeth Warren, who was flat out claiming to be a Native. I mean, she was listing Native American as her ethnicity, and I think it was on some registration to practice law in Texas, and she used it. She listed it when she went to college, so the college could claim that they had a minority staff member or something. And let's be clear, Elizabeth Warren, you're not Native. I mean, look, even if you have some folksy story from your mom's side that says your grandmother was a Cherokee princess. Never heard that one before, or whatever. That there's some Lenape or Delaware or Cherokee on your mother's side. If your mother wasn't Native, if she just merely had a story associated with some distant relatives, then you're not Native. I've seen pictures of your mother, and I know. I hate to say that she looks white, but she certainly you wouldn't mistake her for a Native person if you came upon her. And your folksy story about how your dad's family was so prejudiced against Native people that they forbid them to get married and they had to elope because of her Native ancestry. Come on, I don't know why they didn't like your mother. And maybe there were some other reasons, that justifiable or unjustifiably so. And I'm not calling down your mother, but look, if your mother only had some Native ancestry that she couldn't even fully account for, if she wasn't enrolled, if she didn't have a community that she was tied to, then you certainly don't earn the privilege to identify yourself as a Native person. Now, I know you've apologized, and after you went and did a DNA test and found traces of Native ancestry in your blood somehow, which I don't even buy half of that stuff. I got to bring it up because there's a truthfulness issue here. And while I meet people every day who claim to have Native ancestry, and I don't question it when they say that, or I don't doubt them. I may ask them, well, where from, and who's your family, that kind of stuff. But that's kind of being, that's like formalizing the introduction a little bit more. It's not an interrogation. But when non-Native people claim to be Native, it's not just as innocent as it sounds. Because the first thing that happens is a Native person or a non-Native person now feels like they have obtained some authority to speak on behalf of Native people. We see it all the time in the mascot issue. I mean, look, anytime this mascot issue comes up, you're going to find somebody, and they may even be Native, but more often than not, they're somebody who's, again, great-grandma was a Cherokee princess, who says, well, I'm Native American. I think it's fine that the Washington football team calls themselves a slur. I mean, The Daily Show did a great piece on it, loaded up a whole bleacher full of white people claiming to be, 330 seconds Cherokee or some damn thing. I mean, it's kind of sad. And there's even an organization that's filled with a bunch of frauds that try to they get funded from the Washington football team, and they go to these schools to try to battle against the Native people in the areas. Who basically, talk about why it's offensive. So when I hear a non-Native person claim to be Native, especially not just saying they have Native ancestry, but they claim to be Native, to write down on a paper that I am a Native American, there's something more insidious about that. And there's also this whole idea, especially if you're white. I mean, if you're white, part of it is that you want to claim some victimhood. You want to pretend that white privilege doesn't apply to you. Oh, I can't have white privilege. I'm Native American. I know I don't look it. No. So you want to claim, and if you're white, you might have a hard time passing for black, but you might be able to pass for the whole, well, I'm Native, I just don't look it. because because again we create these images of what a Native person is supposed to look like, which is a whole nother problem. But I was really troubled by the issue. I tried to give it a pass, but the more she kept pressing this issue, the kind of the uglier it got. Now, the one thing that happened recently was in the debates with her taking a shot at her closest ally, if you or what most people would perceive as her closest ally in the field of nominees for the presidency. She took her shots at Bernie Sanders, claiming that he said that a woman couldn't be president. And basically what she was saying was that a woman couldn't beat Donald Trump, I guess, in 2020. He said he didn't say it. Then afterwards, she puts on another display, and it's hot mic'd, and CNN follows it, where she refuses to shake his hand and then says, I think you just called me a liar on national television. Well, no, he didn't. He just said what you said he said, he didn't say. And she never went on to say what she claims exactly he said. I mean, so she didn't own any of this stuff. And then she switches and then starts to try to cause even more, a bit of a division between the men and women thing. Look, there's a huge divide between the right and the left. I mean, Democrats and Republicans. But within the Democratic Party, the level of infighting, look, all this conversation about there not being enough diversity, black versus white, rich versus poor, woman versus man, gay versus straight, all of that stuff. More progressive, versus centrist, or let's face it, left versus right, even within the party. Whether they have black support or not, you got Biden riding Obama's coattail still to try to seek the nomination. Although, if you look at kind of the whole nepotism and his son, earning, big bucks based on his dad's name, there's a little bit of Trumpism going on there too. But there's the factionalism is funny and is incredible. Now, the one place that you probably didn't expect a big divide was between Warren and Sanders. But the gauntlet kind of got thrown down. Any hope that anybody had that maybe Sanders would win the nomination and then pick Warren to be his vice president, I think that just got lopped off. But maybe this was about Warren trying to nail Bernie so she could warm up to Joe. She shook Joe Biden's hand after the debate. She sure as hell didn't shake Bernie Sanders. Said Bernie's my friend. Well, let's face it. Warren, this isn't the first time that she's kind of disrupted a little bit of this system. Everybody expected Warren to endorse Bernie Sanders back in 2016. But instead, she endorsed the candidate who she's been slamming for years over bankruptcy reform, which is the same thing she's been doing against Biden, by the way. She was openly condemning of Hillary Clinton, and yet she endorsed her. Why? Because the establishment, she was lulled into it by the establishment. And so, and perhaps she thought she was going to get a cabinet position, with her, or maybe the VP nod from her, who knows? But she bailed on Bernie in 2016. And now, even though from a policy standpoint, I mean, I'm not saying from a history or a character standpoint, but from a policy standpoint, the person that she is most aligned with in Bernie Sanders, she now has created a rift. Now, and this represents a couple of problems, because when Warren fails to get the nomination, and she's on all likelihood not going to I don't know if she'll make it or not, but it's obviously going to come down to one candidate ultimately. So if she doesn't get the nomination, and Bernie does, are her people going to line up with Bernie, or did she just create a little bit of a, not a Bernie bro, what would you call it, a Liz bros, Liz sis? I don't know, but maybe the Liz faction won't support Sanders. And here's the problem between the Democratic Party anyway, because you have this progressive wing that basically has Sanders and Warren on one side, and you have the centrist, which is everybody else, the rich guys, Bloomberg, Steyer, Biden, the whole big, even Yang, what's her name, Klobuchar. I mean, they're all kind of centrist, right? The centrists will vote with the progressives if the progressives win the nomination. But if the Bernie bros and even the folks supporting Elizabeth Warren just feel like they just got screwed over by the centrists, and all of the policies that they supported those candidates for are going to be thrown away by Biden and company, you may have another failure for turnout for the Democrats, and that's just a pathway for Trump. That's just a pathway for Trump. So the factionalism is really intense, and it's really starting now. I mean, look, I know that all the candidates who have dropped off thus far have thrown some support behind one candidate or the other, and it's nice to think that the Democrats are going to be one big happy family when they narrow this down to one candidate. But I'll tell you one thing: there's no question that the Republicans are united. I mean, they've thrown every thing that they claim to have stood for, except for racism, which they clearly say they don't claim that, but they do. They've thrown everything they stood for away so they could support Donald Trump. Now, any moral authority, the evangelical right, that's almost a joke nowadays. I mean, there's no question that the right is united. And I mean, they'll lie, cheat. I mean, this debacle that they're calling an impeachment trial is, which is a joke. Look, they will ignore everything that Trump does to maintain his support for him. But and I'm not saying that blind loyalty is good either. But the extreme factionalism that's on the other side, that's how guys like Donald Trump get elected. That and a screwed up system, electoral college system. But I think it's really important that people understand some of this stuff. Now, look, I talked a little bit about Warren, but let me talk to you about another candidate who wasn't on the debate stage or anything else, but Mike Bloomberg. Now, you guys in New York City, Mike Bloomberg, and he continues to try to justify, out of his own personal desperation, the whole stop and frisk thing that was his. He owns that, and he continues to. He may apologize for it and say that it was wrong, but he's still justifying it. I mean, even today. So the racism and the elitism, and there's a direct connection between the two, especially when you're talking about financially elite. Was it Joe Biden? He couldn't even distinguish the difference between what was the statement said something about poor people? He mixed up being poor and black almost like it's synonymous.
Yeah. It was one of the same as far as he's concerned.
So I mean, that's the way some of these people think. But no, the stop and frisk thing. But that's not the native issue. Here's the native issue. The other thing that Bloomberg was obsessed with was tobacco, and he hated the fact that that the Puspatuk and the Shinnecock were selling cigarettes, and that people from New York were getting their cigarettes from a native territory, from a native people, and he was obsessed with it. This whole obsession, and it's not. And let's be clear, this is a money thing. He kept raising the taxes. I mean, the taxes on cigarettes in New York City are higher than any place. And he wanted to say because he's trying to cut down smoking. But you know what? Even as the smoking rates dropped, it didn't drop as much as the revenue should have increased. I mean, so on one hand, he wants the smoking to drop, but he still wants the revenue to go up, his tax revenue. And he was pissed that it didn't. Eric Garner, there's a direct connection to choking Eric Garner to death and Mike Bloomberg's tax policies. There's a direct connection. And, the whole over-the-top aggression towards somebody selling a loose cigarette. Mike Bloomberg, you own that too. You own that too. But here's the other thing he did. While he was mayor, for a period of that time, David Patterson was the governor. He became the governor after the Spitzer had to resign in shame. Again, those good Democrats, right? So Spitzer resigns in shame, and David Patterson becomes the governor, first black governor of the state of New York, right? But he was also blind, and I'm not saying that as any kind of call down on these, but it was a matter of fact. But here's what Mike Bloomberg did. Because he knew that one of the places that the tobacco sales was big was Seneca territory. couldn't be farther from New York City. Trust me, I make that trip every week. It's a long ways back to Seneca territory. But he made a statement where he suggested that David Patterson needed to put on a cowboy hat and don a shotgun, stand up on the Thruway, which also, I know you folks here think the Thruway just runs up to Albany, but no. The Thruway runs all the way out to western New York and cuts through Seneca territory. He goes, David Patterson, you need to put on a cowboy hat and a shotgun, stand up on the Thruway and tell the Senecas who's boss. Tell them who's the sheriff in town. So this is the guy who claimed to be fighting was the gun control guy. And he's telling the governor, the blind governor. I mean, granted, he didn't. There's no way that he seriously meant that David Patterson should arm himself and take up arms against the Seneca Nation. But even as a metaphor, that's what this moron suggested. Again, so the racism, so he clearly had animosity towards the Seneca Nation, the Shinnecock, the Puspatuk. So I have some issues with this rich guy trying to buy his way into the presidency. When was the last time a rich guy with no presidential experience, who tried to use his charisma? Well, I'm not saying that Mike Bloomberg has charisma, but no, Mike Bloomberg, his biggest boast is I'm richer than Donald Trump. Well, congratulations. I guess that qualifies you. So I have some issues with a couple of people that are that are still. I mean, this guy throws his hat in late, but just like him and Tom Steyer, they're going to throw tons and tons of money. All of a sudden, Tom Steyer's numbers went up. Why? Because he spent more on advertising from his own personal treasury, his own wealth, than the rest of the candidates combined. All of a sudden, he's gone up in the polls because people are like fish or like sheep. They just follow whatever the TV tells them, whatever Facebook tells them, and so you're going to have two rich guys dumping millions, maybe billions. Actually, I think Mike Bloomberg said that he'd spend $1 billion if he has to. Wasn't that what the line did he say? So?
Yeah, and he
got 60 billion.
And just to note, a couple of weeks ago, before Kamala Harris dropped out, he spent as much. He spent $48 million in 1 week, and that pretty much was the entire budget of the Kamala Harris budget throughout her duration as running for president.
Yeah, I mean,
in 1 week.
So that's what you have with these wealthy guys. So you got a couple of rich guys down there, and look, I'm not saying any of them are destitute. They certainly aren't, but you got a couple of rich guys, really really rich guys. I mean, like I said, what Mike Bloomberg claims to be worth $60 billion now. And here's the other thing. One of the issues, and I realize that Tom Steyer is one of the guys who's talked a lot about the environment and that kind of stuff. But I got to tell you, and I haven't followed the money with Tom Steyer, but if you follow the money, you're going to find if you've become a billionaire, there's a likelihood that you have somehow taken advantage of the fossil fuel economy that is the world essentially. I mean, you don't get $60 billion or earn $60 billion by divesting from fossil fuels. I'm sorry, Bloomberg. And if you suggest that you have, well, then you did it yesterday. You certainly didn't do it too many yesterdays ago. So, I mean, I have some issues with these guys who are, again, the 1%. And so not only are they the 1% in wealth, now they and power that comes with that wealth, but they want to be, the 1% or the 1/10 of 1% that sits in or whatever that fraction is that sits in the White House. Look, the reason I opened up with someday I'll never learn, the Democrats are about to approach a little bit of what they went through in 2016, and that should be a concern to everybody. You got a next song queued up there, Reg? Yes. Okay. All right. Hey, we're at the bottom of the hour. We're going to take a break. Hey, when we come back, we will go to your calls a little bit early because I want to hear what your thoughts are on some of this stuff. And look, if you got something else you want to bring up, I don't mind. We can talk about something else if you choose to. So I'll just give you the number in advance. It's 212-209-2877. So we're going to go out with another, we'll go with a Logan Stats song, and we'll come back and mix it up a little bit more. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk.
To go walk down Market Street, my new suit and my acoustic guitar, counting the cracks in the sidewalk till I reach my favorite bar. Familiar faces, familiar places, familiar graces. Familiar faces, familiar places, familiar graces. What they say, graces. To go walk down Wall Street where the billionaires smoke Cuban cigars, counting the souls in the sidewalk. No one knows who they are. Shattered faces, shattered places, shattered graces. Shattered faces, shattered places, shattered graces. What they say, graces. Whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, oh. I'm broken on my bills, I'm spanning on my chain, I'm down out the cheap thrills, I do it all again. I'm broken on my bills, spent on my chain, and down out the cheap field, and do it all again, yeah, yeah, yeah. To go walk down Market Street with my new suit, my acoustic guitar, counting the cracks in the sidewalk till I reach my favorite bar. Familiar faces, familiar places, familiar races. Familiar faces, familiar places, familiar graces. What you say, graces? To go walk down Wall Street where the billionaires smoke Cuban cigars, counting the souls in the sidewalk. No one knows who they are. Shattered faces, shattered places, shattered graces. Shattered faces, shattered places, shattered graces.
All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk. Hey, I want to remind people again that in 2 weeks I will be screening Indian Horse. It's a film about residential schools and hockey. If you like hockey, it's a little bit of hockey as well. But it's primarily a story about what children experience going through residential school. So I'm going to do that in 2 weeks downstairs at the Brooklyn Commons. That's 388 Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. We're going to probably start it up around about 7 p.m. I'd like, hopefully the room fills up. If it's still people coming in, I'll usually hold the line a little bit. But I'd like to get started early so we can watch the film and then have a conversation about it afterwards. All right, I gotta do something before it gets started, because look, I talk about factionalism within the Democratic Party, within the DNC, and again the whole idea of establishment versus outsiders and that kind of stuff, all that problem. And of course there's factionalism. There's the right and the right left. There's Democrat versus Republican. Now I gotta say, because we get into a lot of debate about identity politics, right? And I gotta flat out say, there is a difference between identifying yourself as a persecuted group, wanting that persecution to stop, and hating all other groups. I'm not talking about nationalism. I'm not talking about racism. I mean, these white supremacists, that's not even the identity politics that I'm talking about. Now, if people want to talk about that stuff, that's fine. But that's not what I'm talking about. And when I hear criticism that the problem with this country is identity politics, no, it isn't. That isn't. And in fact, there's a lot of problems with the country. But the fact that there's diversity that lives on this continent isn't the problem. The problem is that one group has more control than anybody else. And of course, then you have things like electoral college and, so much of the American system. Everybody wants to rave about how great the Constitution is. I mean, Montana has as many senators as California. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. Forget about the disproportionate number of electoral college votes it gets. I mean, so anybody says, well, without the electoral college, you're going to have rural states. You're going to have some states that are not going to have fair representation. No, if you had popular votes, they're all represented as a percentage of by their population. But rural states are always going to have a disproportionate amount of power and representation as long as every state has 2 senators. I mean, that gives, states that have like Vermont or Montana or Idaho as much power as California, Illinois, New York, Texas. I mean, so look, and I'm not even addressing the disproportionate amount of power that rural states have, slave states, many of them have with representation in the U.S. Senate. But on the electoral college stuff, that's insane. And but again, I wanted to address a little of that before we got started, because I didn't want anybody calling up and saying, I thought you were against this. No, I still support people representing themselves as a woman or as an LGBT or as a native or black or whatever else, and having their identity help them decide who they're going to support or not support. As a native person myself, I have preferences in who wins, but I'm not voting for any of them. And I've made that kind of clear. All right, so let me stick some headphones on here, and we'll go to your calls. Let's light it up. The number here is 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to be a part of the show. We can talk about what I've thrown out there or anything else you want to talk about. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk. So who are you and where are you calling from?
Hi, Steve here.
Hey,
New
Steve.
York City.
Hey, Steve.
Hi.
Thanks for calling.
Thank you for being on. A couple of points that listeners might not be familiar with. Maybe you might not be familiar with, John. Number one is that in all of the adult life of Elizabeth Warren, and she is more than 70 years old, in all of the adult life, almost all of it, big majority of that life, Elizabeth Warren registered as and voted as a Republican. That's point number one. Point number two is that Elizabeth Warren is running lately some very tearful kind of advertisements about how unjust $7.25 as a minimum wage is. And after all, that's 2006. That's now 16 years steady, including through the whole Obama 8 years. Obama, Hillary, Biden years, in which they never even made a request for a 1 nickel increase in that 725, while the stock market was more than tripling during their time. Mm-hmm. And while they also, by the way, lowered food stamp receipts by 5% in October 2013. But specifically on Elizabeth Warren and these tiers about the $7.25, she, as you correctly said at some earlier point this hour, she supported the candidate, namely Hillary, in 2016, who did not, like Bernie, say, I want $15. Now, we have $15 state minimum here in New York, and for that matter in California and the northwestern states, because of what Bernie said, but Elizabeth was not there. More recently, $738 billion with a B, that's a lot of money, 738 million times 1,000, and Elizabeth was for this, Bernie against this outrage, which includes a $7.5 billion is going to take off for the border wall, which includes Space Force for the first time, nuclear weapons up into orbit, violating all the Kennedy-Khrushchev treaties, an absolute horror. Elizabeth was for this, Bernie against this. She has presented herself as, well, almost like Bernie. No. She's the saboteur of, or at least the attempted saboteur of the Bernie campaign.
Twice, really, if you think about what she did in 2016. And a point that's worth mentioning, how interesting is it that Hillary Clinton was also a registered Republican through much of her adult life as well?
Listen, I have said at a few times I've been allowed to sort of say this in public spaces, that in her days growing up in Illinois from a relatively comfortable family, the question was, every election time, she didn't miss any elections, which primary, Miss Rodham? And it was always Republican, please. And then she got to Arkansas, and she was the crooked wife, the bag lady for the crooked governor of Arkansas. She was the channel through which the payoffs were made to the crooked governor of Arkansas. Look up Whitewater land deals back in Arkansas. He was called Slick Willie back in those days. This is the Slick Willie who killed Glass-Steagall, one of the jewels of the New Deal.
The crime bill. The crime bill.
Pride in getting us out of the Depression, in separating the gamblers from the bankers. That removal, that separation was killed by the hand of William Jefferson Clinton in 1999. And the instant he killed Glass-Steagall in 1999, that's the moment that J.P. Morgan Chase, the gambler, was able to seize Chase Manhattan Bank. That moment, Bill Clinton gave us 2008 through that 1999 killing of the 66 years in effect Glass-Steagall Act, 1933 to 1999.
How crazy is it that you look into the history of some of these folks like Warren or Hillary Clinton, and you see their Republican history, and then you look at guys like Donald Trump and you see his family's Democrat history, and the fact that they played all the politics they could here in New York to get all of the advantage they could from the Democratic powers that be here in the city. It's kind of interesting that it's just a game to them. There is no ideology almost. I mean, it's bizarre.
A Democrat is, thus we get the Clintons and, I must say, listen carefully, I'm saying it, and the Barack Hussein Obamas.
No, I know, one of the things that, Biden was trying to boast about was that he has the overwhelming support of black voters, which the polls are saying that may not be quite so. But part of it is just he's riding the coattails of the first black president. But many woke black folks have some serious problems with some of what Obama stood for. And as a Native person, I got to remind people where the Dakota Access Pipeline came from. Didn't come from Donald Trump.
John, in addition to not raising that minimum wage through the whole of his, not even a request, even when he still had a Democratic Congress in his first 2 years, 2009, 2010, not even a request. Forget about getting it through. He never even made a request in 8 years, while, as I say, 3.4 times S&P from 600 to 2,400, more than 3 times multiplication.
Yep.
But those aren't the worst crimes. The worst crimes are deporting 3 million people during Barack Obama's 8 years, deporting 3 million from the United States, dropping 6,000 plane loads of bombs on little Libya with 6 million people in order to rip their oil fields away from national ownership by the
drone
Libyans
strikes,
and put that back into Exxon's and BP's hands. He is a horror, an absolute right-winger.
Yeah.
But I will end, and I'll let other callers speak. I will just add this thought. You mentioned something about richness and rich, generally men over here coming to the top. We also have Betsy DeVoe types killing all our public schools.
Sure.
It's not a sin to be rich. It's a sin to be an enemy of the non-rich.
Absolutely.
We can have some pretty rich guys who were great advocates of champions of the non-rich. Number one, of course, being that Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Sure. All right, thanks. Thanks for that, Steve. That was a great commentary, and I'm glad you brought that up because I was familiar with the fact that that Warren's history most of her history was as a Republican, and look, and I'm not suggesting that Warren didn't champion some issues and went after Wall Street and that kind of stuff. I get that, and she went after Wells Fargo and part of that Consumer Safety Board and that kind of stuff. But I thought that she'd have been a good candidate in 2016. Now I'm again, I wasn't going to vote for her then either. But all right, let me go back to some calls here. Caller, you're up next. What's your name and where are you calling from?
John. It's Jeff from Union County, New Jersey.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for calling.
Yeah, but bad timing, boy. This is going to be a hard act to follow, that last call. Oof.
Yeah, he was pretty good. He was done, but go ahead.
He was very good. He was very good. But let me give him my best shot. I've got two things I want to put out there. I want to put them out there because I respect you, and I really want to hear your unique spin on how you see this. Number one, as you always speak about racism and it being a white thing, not a right thing, look at this. Do you remember when the football player that took a knee, not before Kaepernick, the guy that's on TV with the commercials now, he used to take a knee and put his hand on his forehead like a religious gesture?
Tim Tebow.
Oh, Tebow. Yeah, Tebow, that guy, yeah.
People thought that was so charming and all. If he was making a religious statement, as far as I'm concerned, if you're making a religious statement, you're making a political statement because there ain't a nickel's worth of difference between the two.
Yeah, good point.
He got a pass. I mean, here's a guy that couldn't play football and couldn't play baseball, right? But he got famous for taking a knee, and everybody thought it was so charming, so quaint. Then here comes Colin Kaepernick. He feels, he has the courage of his convictions. He takes a knee, standing for something that really meant something, and they wanted to lynch the guy.
Yeah.
I mean, do you see a difference between these two guys? Is there maybe a shade of difference between the two, if you catch my drift?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. You look at the hypocrisy of those two things. A guy who does it, who claims he's doing it, to be religious is, totally embraced by, look, and let's be honest. When people want to say that the United States is that religious, I mean, there are more phony Christians in the United States than any place in the world.
If we're not religious, why is it in every ceremony that you put your hand on a Bible when you take an oath?
It's because it's a ruse. I mean, I think it's one of the ways they try to whitewash all of the bad they do. But I want to make a comparison. Last Saturday was the 7th anniversary of something that I was involved in, which was it was called a flash mob round dance, and this was in the height of the I Don't Know More movement that came out of Western Canada region, some of the native territories there. But I Don't Know More swept through native territories throughout the continent, and even down into South America to some extent. But 7 years ago, we were showing up at malls or public places, and we would show up in, sometimes it might have only been 50 or 100. Sometimes it would be hundreds. Sometimes it'd be thousands. Mall of America, a huge one. But we came together at the Galleria Mall in Buffalo, just outside of Buffalo, a little suburb called Cheektowaga. We went to the Galleria Mall, and we did a round dance. Now, this was, again, in January, and all we did was sing. We sung, the guys in the middle, they played their hand drum, they sung, and a huge circle of people did a round dance around that in the mall. And those white people at that mall lost their minds. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up and comparing to what you're saying, now we didn't have a permit. We weren't demonstrating. We were just dancing for minutes here. We're not talking about hours. That same mall, in a year prior to that or so, a group came together right around Christmas time, and they populated the same area of the mall, including a bunch of stairwells and everything else, and they sang Christmas carols. Now, so a group without a permit could go there and do this festive, Christian holiday stuff, and everybody just thought it was just wonderful. But when Native people showed up and did a round dance, which was a celebration, essentially, they called the cops. And if I encourage you, if you are on Facebook, you can go to my Facebook group page. There's a video. If you see a video of looking down on a bunch of people, I'm in that video. I am the guy who stopped the cops from ending the round dance. And while I don't advise people get as physical with a police officer as perhaps I did, and I didn't hit him or anything else, but we kind of mixed it up a little bit. But again, I immediately went to the absolute hypocrisy of hundreds of people showing up to sing Christmas carols spontaneously at a mall, and hundreds of people doing a round dance at the same mall. And again, there was a skin shade issue there as well.
That's incredible.
So
listen, while I got you, if you would indulge me, I got another point I'd like to make, please.
Go ahead.
Okay, you said you were 60. I'm 65. Well, I'll be 65 in March. So we're basically pretty much peers as far as age.
Yeah, we're in the neighborhood.
Yeah. I know you're younger. You don't have to rub it in. But anyway, I don't know about when you went to school, but I know when I went to school, especially grammar school, they used to tell us, and I mean, they really used to beat it into our heads that if you behave yourself, if you try hard in school, if you listen to your parents, if you work hard, you could be president. Now look at today. What would you tell a kid in school today? If you cheat on all your wives, if you screw all your business partners, if you lie every chance you get, if you can inherit money from your filthy rich father and as a loan and never pay it back, if you could pay porn stars and strippers for sex while you're married to other women and you cheat on them while they're pregnant, you too could be president of the United States. How in the world did we get from point A to point B in such a relatively short period of time?
Again, when you talk about regression, I did my last show back home. I talked about how Native people went from being enlightened about our relationship with creation and our commitment to the future generations and governing through consensus. And so many Native people have bought into this quote unquote American dream and this idea of majority rule or largest minority rule or powerful minority rule. This idea that that we. That getting rich and that men rule the planet and that whole religious dogma that comes along with it. I don't know how Native people took such a giant leap backwards, but you're right. I mean, when you think about what was considered the ethics and the morality of success, the only measure of success by American standards is dollars and cents. How you got there doesn't even matter. And frankly, the courts even agree with that. Some of our land issues that Native people experience, the courts will say, look, even if you lost your land by fraud or theft, I'm sorry, you can't have it back. You can't. Native people cannot reclaim lost land, however they do it, even if they buy it, and then claim to assert sovereignty over it again. They said if you lost it, and this was Ruth Bader Ginsburg is the one who cited this in a case up in Central New York. She says, "Look, we just can't allow you." She called it the doctrine of impossibility. That's a thing, right? That's a legal principle. That if once Native people have lost their land, however they lost it, and however they get it back, they can't claim to assert sovereignty over it. She says that's an impossibility doctrine and she cited that along with the doctrine of Christian discovery. Again, the Jewish liberal darling of the Supreme Court citing some of the most racist and right wing legal theories to keep America great again.
And you know the worst thing, John?
What's that?
The worst thing is, if God forbid something happens to her while Trump is president, he's going to find somebody light years worse than her to replace her. So you and I both should light a metaphorical candle for that woman.
Well, yeah. Well, look, I don't wish death upon her, but I will hold her accountable. And I think she should be held to a standard. I mean, she should have a better sense for what oppressed people go through. And I'm not asking, I'm not saying death to Ginsburg or anything like that. I don't, look, and I know what the alternative could be worse. But yeah, even the left side of the Supreme Court seems to make bad rulings when it comes to Native issues. Jeff, I appreciate the call. I really do. All right, we'll take one more caller before we take a break at the top of the hour, and then we'll do a full hour of calls after that. So, caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is you talking to me?
Yes, I am. You're up.
Oh, okay. This is TK.
Hey, TK, thanks for calling.
From Rockland County.
Okay.
You're going to get a little pushback right now because I listen to your show all the time, but I'm not happy about your politics. Only
that's
because fine. I thank you. Only because I feel like you, Gary. There's been a few people on BAI that have said some stuff a few years ago, which is the reason we got Agent Orange in there now. If we had a choice between Agent Orange and Hillary, you guys were pretty much like, oh, well, the hell with Hillary, and now we got Agent Orange. So here we are once again. And I'm feeling like if we have a choice between Elizabeth Warren and the Agent Orange, who's in there now, Trumpelstiltskin, Am I not going to pick Elizabeth Warren?
Sure, by all means, and I don't have a problem with that taking that political stand. In fact, what I'm condemning is that the Democrats are much more factionalized than the Republicans. Look, the Republicans weren't in love with Donald Trump, but you wouldn't know it now. Most of those, they were the never Trumpers that he talks about. And so they've all circled the wagons around their leader.
They're pragmatists.
What's that?
They're pragmatists. They know how to suck it up to get what they want.
Well, you can call that pragmatism, or you can call it opportunistic. You can call it hypocrisy, whatever you want to call it. But whatever.
It's the American way, and it'll keep you closer to getting what you want than for us to keep looking for this perfect candidate, which does not exist, because that means there's a perfect person, which does not exist. So there's some great things about Bernie, but Bernie has got a lot of negatives as well. I mean, name a few things that he got to actually push through where he's at. Name something in the Senate. I mean, at least Elizabeth Warren, we have the Consumer Protection Bureau.
She was appointed to that. She didn't create that.
Yeah, she was appointed to that. She was appointed
to that bureau, that spot. She didn't create it.
Okay, so what did Bernie create? He's been there longer than anybody. What has he passed?
Well, let me be clear here. Look, I don't consider myself a Democrat or Republican. I do feel strongly about human rights, even above civil rights, because I think civil rights are the rights that you claim you want to have within the Constitution. One of my issues, and I'm not going to berate Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther King, in his most famous speech, I Have a Dream speech, he talked about the promissory note that was the Constitution and that was the Declaration of Independence. Well, Native people, we don't look at those things as promissory notes for us. So I'm not, I don't really fit in the same box that you're going to throw me in with Gary or anybody else. I mean, I never wished Donald Trump upon the Americans. I did predict it, though. I said, look, the divisiveness that happens on the left, and that's essentially the reason I'm even having this show here, is it's a warning. I mean, I'm just saying, look, if the divisiveness continues on the left, you're going to end up with Stiltskin again. And so, I mean, so if you want to condemn my politics for saying that, you just bore out the truth of what I'm saying, because it happened the last time. So I don't think you really do disagree with my politics, and I'm not endorsing any candidate. I spoke out against two specific candidates that I have an issue with: Elizabeth Warren and Mike Bloomberg, because of again, from a Native perspective. I also am concerned about wealth buying the presidency, but I didn't. Look, I'm not endorsing a candidate, nor will I, because I won't vote. And again, I'll explain just in case people aren't familiar with the reason that I won't vote in a U.S. election is because I don't consider myself a U.S. citizen. I'm Mohawk. I'm Gunjagahaga. And although they will allow me to vote, but in order to do that, you know what I have to do? And this isn't just because of this thing in North Dakota or anything else, but I've got to register to vote. So I got to put the address. I got to put the place that I live on a registration form and essentially attest that where I live is a part of New York State. And I live on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. I don't consider where I live a part of New York State. So in order for me to register, because the states run elections, not the federal government, I've got to say that the land that I live on, the place that I live, the native territory that I live on, is in New York State, is in somebody's congressional district, or is in somebody's legislative district. And frankly, I won't do that. Look, if you're Native and you live in New York City, by all means, take a stand. But I'm saying if you're Native, you live on Native territory, just be careful what you're putting your name to.
That's fair.
Okay.
Thank you.
But again, I don't think you disagree with my politics. And again, look, the reason I said what I said in 2016 was because I was concerned that Trump was going to win. And did I think Hillary was a bad candidate? Yes, I do think she was a bad candidate, and she lost. I mean, and part of the reason that she lost was because some of the shenanigans that the DNC was involved in, and kind of the covert way that they attempted to marginalize Bernie. And I think they're going to do that again. I mean, the reason you got Joe Biden leading the pack is because he's the establishment candidate, and you're going to see the same problems with the super delegates that you saw the last time. And I think you could end up having the same problem. So I'm putting this out as a cautionary tale here, not as I'm not advocating for Donald Trump by any means. But again, thanks for the call. All right, we'll take a break. We'll go out on another song. We'll do another Murray Porter song, and one you're familiar with. And then when we come back, we'll go back to your calls. Again, the number 212-209-2877. Write it down. I'll repeat it again when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk.
If you're drinking that water, red blues, red blues, red blues, baby, red blues. Every kind of people got every kind of blues, but a red man's got red blues. All right.
All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk, and hey, we're talking politics. I mean, and I do this all the time. I know everything's wrong. That guy's always talking about racism. He's always angry. Look, I'm not angry.
Why are you angry all the time? And you know, and I just wanted to note something before about that whole thing that the thing with the mall thing and stuff. You know, it's Christmas. Why you don't like Christmas, John?
It was January. It wasn't Christmas. It was already passed.
Oh, you don't like the holidays. You don't like the holidays, John.
Did you see that video? Did you watch it?
I know. I saw you showed me to it.
Oh man,
that was crazy.
My wife yelled
that was
at me.
crazy.
For anybody, I encourage you to look at on my group page, Let's Talk Native, Let's Talk group page. It should be there. You don't have to scroll down too far, but you know, it's funny because my wife called me up afterwards and gave me hell. She says, "What the hell are you doing fighting with a cop?" I said, "Babe, come on, I wasn't fighting with a cop. I just got in his way." She says,
"Baby,
not the view that I saw."
Baby.
So the buddy that was with me, carrying the flag, holding the flag, he puts his phone in front of me, shows his. Geez, I didn't remember doing all that. I didn't realize we actually grabbed each other and I pushed him back 3 or 4 steps. I said, and then my wife did. You know what she did? She turned one of my own lines on me. I always tell people, don't get arrested on a Friday. You get arrested on a Friday, you're going to sit your ass in jail till Monday. So my wife says, and you know better. You're not supposed to get arrested on a Friday. I said, but I didn't get arrested. She goes, but you should have been. She was actually thinking that I deserved to get arrested. And you know what? I got to tell people, although I pulled off what most people didn't think was likely to happen. I physically resisted a police officer. I did at all times maintain a smile and tried to be diplomatic with him, and I talked him down. So it is possible you can offer some resistance. And look, and if you're a New York City cop and you watch this video, I know your first instinct is that, man, I'd have just flopped your ass on the ground and I'd have stomped you and I'd have pepper spray. But you know what? Look how it ended up. And it ended up, everybody walked out of there. Our people all went through the food court and bought up all that stuff that they shouldn't be eating and feeding their diabetes. Our people went through all, and look, we bought stuff there. I mean, it's not like we didn't patronize the mall, and nobody was hurt. And again, some people have posted some videos and they called it an attack. I said, look, it wasn't an attack. It could have been. I got to tell you, when I walked out of the Galleria Mall, there were like 12 to 15 cop cars lined up out there. They brought a bunch of people in to haul us out of there, but anyway, but yeah.
Why you don't like Christmas?
I hate Christmas.
Yeah, you don't. Why you like Christmas? That's all. That's the real reason. That is the real reason, John. Be real about that.
All right, we're gonna move past. We're in January now. We can stop talking about Christmas finally. I want to remind people again, showing a film at the end of this month. It's not Christmas, and it's hockey, which is a winter sport, but it's still not Christmas. No, it's about the residential schools. Come join me. Come down. You see, I'm not angry. In fact, I enjoy movie, so come down and watch a movie with us, and we'll talk about it. That's at the Brooklyn Commons, 388 Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, New York, at the Brooklyn Commons. I want to remind people, yes, we are WBAI, which means that, yes, we're in need. We need your help. We need your support. So I want to remind people to go to the pledge line. Go to 516-620-3602. Make a contribution. Do a one-time contribution. You want to do a contribution every month, you can sign up as a BAI buddy. I'd appreciate it if you'd do it in the name of the show. And look, I mentioned last week, I've got a couple of books. I've got some Murray Porter CDs. If you sign up as a buddy, we'll track you down and we'll offer you a couple of gifts. Now, there's also some other perks that come with being a buddy. What do you get? A tote bag?
You get a tote bag.
Right.
You get a membership card that'll entitle you to discounts with participating entities like restaurants, movie theaters, gymnasiums, things like that.
It pays you right back. And look, I'd be happy to send you a CD, or I had Pagans in the Promised Land. Last week. The book
week
by Stephen Newcomb on the Doctrine of Discovery. I've got a couple other books, the Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King. Look, I've got Laura Kuji poetry books still. I mean, so look, I've got a number of things that if you're interested, sign up as a buddy, and then we'll talk gifts afterwards. We won't surprise you. We'll even consult with you. So, but look, I'd like to get my buddy list up to. I'd love to have 50 WBI buddies before we get past the next quarter. I think I'm right around 30 right now, but I'd love to sign up another 20 buddies. So again, go to the pledge line. That's 516-620-3602. You can go online at give2wbai.org. That's GIVE, the number 2, WBAI.org. And look, if you go online, you can also see how you can text a donation. All right. So we've been talking a little bit about politics. And again, my concern is the difference about the fragmentation on the left within the DNC and the lockstep, almost Nazi marching orders that you see that come from the right. And look, and I'm not even advocating I'm not advocating that kind of unity, because I think that kind of unity is almost blind. I think you should be able to hold elected officials accountable. And not all elected officials, appointed officials. Anybody whose job is in public service, they work for you. And one of the concepts that Native people had was that we didn't have leaders. We had people that we assigned responsibilities to, that they were servants of the people. That whole concept of servant of the people, that was ours. Now, Americans use that, but if you become a senator like Mitch McConnell, and you can increase your wealth tenfold or 20-fold over the course of being a senator, earning less than $200,000 a year, if you can be worth $200 million when you're said and done, you won the lottery. You're not a public servant. You're a lord and master over the public that you're supposed to serve. So, but at some point, the best way to prevent the abuse of authority is not give it. So take some of it back. Hold people accountable. That's my thoughts. All right, let me go to the callers. Caller, you're up next. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Peter, I'm calling from Tampa, but I'm from Glen Ridge.
All right, Peter, thanks for calling.
Hey, I got to correct you. You said something last week. You talk about all the presidents have blood on their hands with regard to Native Americans.
Sure.
But you gave William Henry Harrison a pass because he was only in office for 1 month, neglecting the fact that he did his slaughter 30 years earlier at the Battle of Tippecanoe.
Well, even beyond that, he was the governor of I think Indiana Territory, and he was terrible. So, but no, I only gave him a pass because he didn't do it as a president. But you're right. No, he was terrible.
But that was his campaign slogan. 30 years later, he was still bragging about it. He got elected by saying Tippecanoe and Tyler too.
Yeah. No, thanks for bringing it up. That's true. One of the famous letters that I've read on air, and I don't have it here in front of me, but it's from Thomas Jefferson to William Henry Harrison. And Thomas Jefferson is basically telling Harrison, let's cultivate the love from Native people. Let's convince them that we love them. And in fact, let's give them credit. Let's let the shops, the trading posts who interact with Native people barely make any money, but run them in debt. And once you run them in debt, they'll lop off the debt with their land. And then we get to take their land. And we get them. This was Thomas Jefferson to Henry Harrison. This was his advice on how to take over. I mean, in his one letter, he captures, both the assimilation, removal, because he said, look, once we circumscribed them, they'll either have to assimilate or they'll have to leave. And if they assimilate, it'll be the end of them. It'll be the end of their culture. And so Jefferson knew that. I mean, he was actually he was the architect of the Removal Act. Everybody thinks it was Andrew Jackson, but it was Thomas Jefferson. That's what the Louisiana Purchase was all about. That's what he sold. How he sold the idea to the Southern states was, look, you want to get rid of these Indians? You help us, finance buying this Louisiana Purchase, and we'll ship all the Indians out that way. And of course, it wasn't just the idea of moving them. It was about moving them and imposing poverty, never paying them or giving them the proper, materials and the resources to start over. It was, and so it was Thomas Jefferson. And again, I can't, again, one of the worst things I ever saw was the letter that he wrote to William Henry Harrison. And so I appreciate you calling up and setting the record. I wasn't bragging about Harrison. I was just saying that because he died so early, he didn't have the chance as a president to be a town destroyer as president, but he was a town destroyer plenty as a governor.
And that he used it as his campaign. So 30 years later, he got elected by flaunting it on his campaign slogan.
Yeah, no,
where did the expression Indian giver come from? You just made me think of that.
Somebody asked me that earlier, and I don't know. I mean, and I'm not even sure what it's supposed to mean. I mean, the suggestion is somehow that if you give something or if an Indian gives you something, he takes it back. I think it's the roles are reversed. I think that's one of those things that got completely twisted because, there's nobody else other than Native people that have been the victim of false promises more so than Native people from the United States. The United States has broken every treaty in one form or another. In fact, they even have Supreme Court rulings that suggest, their right to break treaties and how they are empowered to abrogate treaties in the national interest. So it's like, so what good is the promise? What good is any of that stuff? I mean, forget about King's promissory note. There's some real specific promissory notes that the United States entered into and never upheld. Even a lot of the land issues, Dawes Act, a lot of the land forfeitures. The United States was really, really delinquent, including the Trail of Tears, or Trails of Tears, but certainly the Cherokees that lost a third of their population being marched out to Oklahoma. They didn't get paid for something like another decade. That's how long it would take. The reason you had the executions in Mankato, Minnesota, the day after Christmas, that all had to do with Lincoln's Homestead Act. yeah, they put up all this land for sale for white people, or Homestead Act lands, which was essentially for free. But and they call it federal lands, but the federal government never paid the Native people for it, and never provided the resources that they were supposed to, the provisions that they were supposed to be given. So part of the reason that there was such this Dakota uprising was because the Native people were starving. They had been stripped of their land, stripped of their means to sustain themselves, and that's why they said, "Look, we're not gonna sit by while white people take all of our land and live high off the hog." I mean, is it off the hog or on the hog?
Off the hog.
Okay, all right.
High on the hog. High on the hog.
All right. So it's funny. I showed a film about the Dakota 38, the ones who were executed the day after Christmas, and the film is a modern day film about riders who retraced the steps that these guys had to were marched out to Mankato for their execution. So they call them the riders, the Dakota 38 riders, and they do it every year. And so they end up in Mankato, Minnesota, the day after Christmas, and they do a bit of a ceremony and that kind of stuff. But the film follows one young man. His name was Billy Ray Dumark, and Billy Ray. You don't in the credits. All of a sudden it says in memorial of him. And so I checked out what Billy Ray, now through the film, first off, Billy Ray struggled. He struggled with the whole idea of the hospitality that white people were affording them as they made this ride. And the producer of the film, who was from down here in New York, Long Island or something like that, he says, I don't know, these white people can't make it any easier for Native people. I don't know why people are not just embracing their hospitality. What he couldn't understand is that they were all affluent white people on the lands that used to be Dakota lands. So a lot of what the tension that many of these people had is that, look, they're leaving impoverished situations to do this ride that they're hoping they're going to get some sort of lift from, some spiritual lift or whatever, peace of mind. And it's a constant reminder the whole trip about how these white people had these large ranches, these big farms and farmhouses and all these, all this affluence off of their land. And that's what Billy Ray Dumark was struggling with. But as I said, it turns out that they did immemorial to him because he committed suicide before the next ride. He never made a second ride. That was the ride that he had made. And in the interview, he said, I look forward to doing this next year. But the depressed environment that Native people, though, especially some of those folks, left to do this ride. And the lift they got him wasn't enough to carry him a full year to the next ride. But, again, I think people can't appreciate how difficult it is for Native people to see the level of affluence that some people enjoy off of the resources that was theirs. So anyway, Peter, I appreciate the call. Let me go to the next caller. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from? Yep, you're up next. What's your name?
Is that me?
Yeah,
is that me?
This is you.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Reggie. This is Dorcas. My name is kind of a difficult one to pronounce.
Say it again.
It's Dorcas.
Dorca? Okay.
Yes, with an S at the end.
Dorcas. Okay, all right. With a little bit of a
But I'm Puerto Rican.
All right. Well, what's on your mind?
Yeah, just piggybacking off of what you just were talking about, John. I mean, I think it's pretty, let's face it, the history of this country, of the government of this country is a horror show. And most definitely to the native, the indigenous people of this land, we couldn't even begin to repay, for the horrific, history this country has imposed, or this government has imposed.
Yeah, where would you start with reparations? I mean, I know there's a lot of conversation about, but it's, when you talk about reconciliation, the problem with the idea of reconciliation, it makes it sound like you can return to a time where things were right, and they were never right. I mean, from the first time Columbus stepped on the Isles of what he called Espanol, the terror started. Yeah,
exactly. And I can certainly understand that. I come from a the island of Puerto Rico, my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And my actually, I claim some native ancestry, John.
Well, I mean,
my great grandmother was Taino, was a pure Taino Indian. So, and thinking back to her life and what her life might have been, with my mother's family being from Spain, and probably, who knows if that was a willing marriage or not.
Sure. I mean, colonialism had a strong element of the rape culture associated, and there's no question about it.
Absolutely.
Most people, they always associate, smallpox and influenza, but they always kind of skip over the amount of venereal disease that came off of those ships and the rape culture that came with it. And whether you're talking about Pocahontas being raped and indoctrinated, or
Right.
Captain Cook going into Hawaii knowing that a percentage of that population would perish simply because his men would have their way with some of the women. I mean, it was, there's no way of knowing. And it was funny on the train ride down here. I was thinking I was going to do a post on Facebook and just ask the question: Is an indigenous person who speaks Spanish somehow more indoctrinated than an indigenous person who speaks English? Because we
Probably, yeah.
Well, I don't know that they are. I don't know that they are any less or any more. Look, Spanish is a colonially imposed language, just like English was. And, oftentimes there's a separation between what people consider the Latina, Latinx, Hispanic, Chicano, whatever word people want to use, the Spanish-speaking indigenous people and the English-speaking indigenous people. But the only difference is the language. I mean, look, I understand that Catholicism is also a little stronger within the Spanish-speaking indigenous population, but not all of them. And frankly, there's an awful lot of Christian natives that I don't know how they reconcile the role that the church has played in so many the horrors that Native people experience, including the residential schools and what people now call the clergy sex abuse scandal. I maintain that the clergy sex abuse really became asserted through the residential schools. You think about schools that had no oversight from the government, just got paid from the government. They were sponsored and funded by taxpayers. But these churches that ran these schools, and they were all churches that had ran these schools, they had no oversight, and they literally had ownership. They had a power of attorney over children. They never had to answer to the parents or anything else. That's where a lot of this clergy sex abuse, I maintain that's where a lot of the clergy sex abuse was born out of these residential schools.
Absolutely, and it's something that's not mentioned.
Right.
And I know that in Puerto Rico in particular, it was the Seventh-day Adventists.
Sure.
After the Catholic Church, of course, which, of course, then when you think about, the not only the indigenous peoples of the island, but also the African slaves that were brought over.
Sure.
The truth is that religion then became a source of survival in a sense.
Well, and I actually maintain that we regressed when we accepted or conceded or fell to that assimilation. We went from a people. And most indigenous people have a stronger sense for our relationship with creation, understanding that we were not placed as the lords and masters of the planet. That's Christian dogma, or the other religions of Abraham that support that idea. So we go from being a people who understood our relationship with all of creation, living and non-living, to buying into this notion that God created us in His image and that He placed us on the earth to rule the planet. And that's a step backwards. And of course, it's not supported by science. So in spite of all the technological advances, all the advancements in science, there's no proof that any of the religious stuff is true, including the power of prayer, which people rely so heavily on. I say do an act of kindness. You want to help somebody? Perform an act of kindness. What you do, whether you kneel by your bed and put your hands together and speak to an invisible man in the sky or not, that isn't necessarily going to do as much to help somebody as actually doing a physical act to help somebody.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I'm Christian. I was born and raised in the Christian faith, and I believe in a higher power. I believe in a universal power of love and forgiveness and peace and all of that. But I believe in God. I believe in, I'm a Christian, but
But even the Pope said that if you pray to end hunger, then feed somebody.
absolutely. And Jesus was a revolutionary in that he didn't only speak kindness, but he actually acted upon it.
Sure.
And he always spoke about action versus just, speaking or
Sure.
theorizing about things.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the call. I'm going to try to get one more caller in before we take a break at the bottom of the hour. Great call. It's always good to hear from somebody from, again from the islands, whether it's Puerto Rico. I know we get a lot of callers who call in from some who have Caribbean ancestry, and it's always good to hear from some folks. So we'll go to another caller and then take a break. We'll go out with another song. So caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, John. It's Donna from Langhorne.
All right, Donna, how was your trip?
Oh, it was awesome. It was really great, but a lot of eye-opening moments. I mean, the day that we got there, we drove to the cottage that we were going to stay in. Now, this is our 10th time to the Big Island. It's like home away from home. And we went to stay at this cottage that I found on Airbnb, and it was like this. They made sure to make us understand that they were a religious Christian family, a good Christian family. And they actually invited us to their Sunday service, which I declined. And but so that night when we got there, I was talking to the woman, and she was saying, different places, telling us different places where we could go that we might not know of. And I said, well, one place I really want to go to is I want to go up to where the protest is. I want to, do you know anything about what's going on up there? And she said, oh, those people. She said, those people have made Saddle Road into a parking lot, and who the heck do they think they are? That is not sacred ground. And she just went on and on and on, and how they treat their children, and that they are not good parents. And I was like, wow, I can't believe. And I said, that is not true at all. Those things that you were saying are not true at all. I said, Christianity stepped in and harmed people, and it's harming people it's from the day that it started, it's harming them to this day through the generations. And she said, where would they be without us? They wouldn't even have cars.
Well, what was the one, I think, was it a senator or congressman who just said that, if it wasn't for slavery, black people would still be running around with bones in their noses.
Bones in their
Yeah, and of course the whole idea that Native people, it was a good trade. We lost all our land and went through this terror of genocide, but it was worth it because we learned about God.
Right, and I said to her, like, you really think that Natives would not progress without Europeans or white people coming in? You think that Natives never progressed? I said the difference is that your progression is destructive.
It's based on dollars and cents, right? Just wealth.
Right. It's
now,
too fast.
tell me this, Donna. Now, you said this was your 10th trip back. Is this really? I mean, this trip. You obviously became very moved because you and I have talked a little bit by the level of racism that you experienced. Is this the first time that it's been this evident, or is it just? I mean, is it worse this time? Because Hawaiian people are stepping up and standing up for themselves, or do you think? What's your experience in terms of relative to your other trips?
Well, there's always been a degree of racism. It's worse now since the Natives are stepping up and trying to protect their sacred lands. It's way worse. I mean, I got it from that woman the first night, and then another night we went and to a bar or a fast food place where they serve alcohol, and down on the water, and we were sitting there, and this guy sat next to us, and we started a conversation, and he pretty much said the same thing. He said, where would they be without Christianity? And this guy had money, and he said, I'm not helping. He said, you see those people down there that are homeless and that are, begging and asking for handouts? He said, I'm not helping any of them. He said, they don't deserve help. And I was like, those people are in the spot that they are in because of people
folks like him being there, right?
Right, exactly. And you're not going to help them. And he went on the same thing about the protesters, and he also said, he's like, they deserve to have their children taken away because they sacrificed them throughout history. There was
they did human sacrifices of their children. That old myth again.
Yeah, and I said, oh, and when the Christians stepped in and they took the children and put them in assimilation schools, boarding schools, what did they do to them? Rape them, abuse them, kill them, put them in their little graveyards outside of their school. So,
Now, here's the other thing that's amazing is to think about this. Hawaii is pretty much a Democratic state.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they
Right.
I think both their senators have been, historically, they've always had, Democrats. I'm not saying there aren't Republicans in Hawaii, but they don't mount a real solid political challenge because the population is pretty much, Democratic. So again, I go back to this thing that racism isn't a right thing; it's a white thing. I mean, and you can
Right.
see it in a place, especially like Hawaii, where the group that they are persecuting is so distinct from them, and yet they are the
yes.
people who predate their existence there. It's amazing.
Yes, and when you get to when you talk to Hawaiian people in a setting where they're kind of in the service of others, like at a resort or something.
Yeah, the service
they're kind
industry
of
in general. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, they're hush hush. They're afraid to talk. But when you get them, like when I went to the farmers market and I got to talk to people about the protests, they were like, America does not own this land. It's an illegal occupation, and they want to talk about it, and they want to stand up for it.
Well, and that sentiment
And
has really regained traction. I mean, there was generations that didn't quite understand. And I've talked to guys like, Umi Perkins and Keanu Sai and some of these famous Hawaiian scholars. I've had them on the show a few times, Leon Su, who they know that generations bought the story that they were fed, that frankly, that that Hawaii was legitimately annexed. Then they find out later, and some of these guys had already been Christianized. They've joined the military. They did all these things, and all of a sudden they're realizing that their entire lives were based on lies, and part of it was they suppressed the truth. And this generation, and this has come through since the 70s. I mean, a part of this has to do with some of the sovereignty movement that that Native people, AIM and others, were involved in. There was the apology resolution that came during the Clinton administration back in '93, that where the United States acknowledged through a joint resolution of Congress, which has no legal authority, but a joint resolution of Congress that says admits what they did, but nothing to rectify. And so the solution ends up being guys like Barack Obama and others saying, well, we'll just turn you all into an Indian tribe and we'll set you up like we've done with the native people on the continent so well. It's like, yeah, well, try talking to some native people on the continent and see how that's worked out, because we share the exact same experience that many Native Hawaiians do. We are on the bottom of every list you don't want to be on, and we're on the top of every list you don't want to be on. And federal recognition as an Indian tribe is going to do nothing to help them. It's going to do more. It's really an assimilation process that's almost as egregious as any of the other ones. So.
Right. Well, I will say one thing that was good is I talked to a Hawaiian guy, young guy, who works on one of the tour buses. And I said to him, do you guys, you go down Saddle Road, do you discuss what's going on there, to the people that are on the bus? Do you tell them what's going on? He said, yeah. He's like, we delve into it somewhat. He said, but every once in a while, he said, actually, it happens more often than not. Somebody will ask what's going on there. And then he's like, then I let them have it. I just tell them everything.
Once they ask, open the can of worms.
Right. And I said, and they let you do that? He's like, yep, the tour bus company is very good about it. And he said, and it changes people's minds. The people on the bus are like, oh, we don't want that telescope. And then all of a sudden, and so it seems like some people are, some of these companies are allowing the education to go through, and tourists are being educated. So that's a good thing. It's such a crazy whirlwind. Like, that was my mission. Like, I wanted to talk to people.
Yeah,
about
I haven't been to Hawaii yet, and I've got friends there. In fact, I'm probably going to join. I may dial into Songs of Sovereignty next week, which is on Wednesday. It's on Kauai Community Radio. I may join them next week. The Poor People's Campaign, by the way, is out of New York, is also stepping up on supporting, putting together some support from those protesting or protecting Mauna Kea. So, Don, I want to thank you.
Can I just tell you one thing?
Yeah,
I
real
didn't
quick.
get to speak to Pua Case, but one of the other ladies that's in charge there said they're holding ground. There's no military presence, even though there's a barracks right down the road. They are swearing that they are not going to do what they did in Standing Rock, where they're going to use lethal force. So she seemed to be very, secure in that they weren't going to go through another.
Yeah, the sad part is a lot of the police officers and the military are Hawaiian people. So it's oftentimes you'll see this whole, how difficult that is. I mean, clearly you didn't see a whole lot of Native people standing up with Morton County sheriffs in Standing Rock. It was,
right.
But in Hawaii, you can't help but see that, some of it's fighting amongst, people of Hawaiian heritage, even though they have, political disagreements.
Right.
So
yeah, the face of the police is Hawaiian.
Yeah. Well, Donna, we'll get you back on here. We've got some mascot issues. How'd you like my video, by the way?
Oh, I love it. It's so good. Thank you so much.
I got a bunch of people who are trying to share it with some of the schools that are currently, engaged in the issue. I know there's a couple of schools here in New York that are dealing with it, and I've encouraged people. I say to everybody, look, when I put stuff out on YouTube, I expect it to be shared. Nobody, look, you want to ask me permission, but you go ahead. But I'm giving permission. That's why I do these things. I do these videos, and I put this information out there so people will use it and share it. Just don't forget me. That's all.
Absolutely. We can't forget you.
All right, Donna. Thanks for calling. It's good to hear from you, and I'm glad you made it back home safe and sound.
Thanks.
All right. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back and wrap up some more phone calls. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk. We'll be right back.
Can't you hear the babies cry? Can't you see the parents try? Give a child a better life. He works an honest day for his honest pay. Still can't see him get ahead. Stay on that straight and narrow path. Don't give up now. How long can it last? Yeah. The time will come. You know the time will come, baby. When nice guys don't finish last. When the good don't die, yeah. You know that time will come. Time will come. You say that your heart is cold. Been hurt so many times before. Don't turn your back on precious love. 'Cause there's somebody walking around feeling just like you are now. They ain't gonna come through your front door. Open up your heart and don't get down. What goes around will surely come around. Yeah, the time will come when nice guys don't finish last. And when the good don't die, oh no, no, you know the time will come, the time will come.
All right, time will come. We'll see anyway. We'll see if time will come. Get Murray Porter. That's from his Songs Live and Life Played album. That's his Juno Award-winning album. Again, Murray Porter, one of my favorites. Love playing his music. All right, I'd like to get right back into this. Let me give out the number again. We got about what do we got? 10, 15 minutes we can play around with here. So I'll get the number out again. It's 212-209-2877. That's the number to call. I see we got a couple already lined up, so we'll go to you. Caller first. You're up. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, hi, I'm George. I'm calling from Long Island.
Hey, George. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I always enjoy your show and have supported BAI in the past and will again in the future.
Well, I appreciate that.
Not a problem, man. I agree with like 99% of everything you ever say. I'm totally on board. Now, there's two things I want to bring up while we're on air, and I want to be constructive. The first thing is there's a podcast called Seeing White. I strongly recommend this.
Seeing as in S-E-E-I-N-G?
That's right, with your eyes.
Okay.
Seeing White.
Okay.
It's put out by Duke University. It's a podcast. It's like 16 hours long, and I strongly recommend it. You can stop anywhere in that thing. It's in hour chunks, and you can listen. And it goes over the real truth of the United States history, which is, as you have covered before, it's got a lot of negative stuff in it. But it will help to unravel how we got to this perspective that you so often touch upon, which I agree on. It's called Seeing White. It's by Duke University. And if you do a search on the Internet, put in Seeing White and then the words seen on the radio.
Okay.
It's excellent. Okay, the second point I want to get to, because time is tight and I tend to speak in chunks, and hopefully it has value for people out there listening. The other thing I just want to mention to you, when it comes to politicians and stuff like that, okay, look, my relatives are in politics. I deal with politics like you. It's all around me, and I interface with it. Let's be real here. People do evolve. Now, if 50 years ago Elizabeth Warren, registered as a Republican, or 50 years ago, half a century ago, somebody did this and did that, they should renounce that. Mistakes get made. When you're 20, you don't think like when you're 45. You think differently. You know more. If you're paying attention, you know more. So we can't go back half a century on some people and say we can't get behind them. Like you said before, the thing that will really give us Trump for a second term is if we don't get our ducks in a row and if we stay in factions. We can't be in factions. We have to understand right now we get to fall in love. But after the primary season, we got to fall in line. That's the truth.
Well, and you make a good point, and I think the factionalism is problematic. I think, the part that concerns me the most about the dysfunction of the Democrats isn't even the factionalism. Part of it is there's a machine there, and the machine isn't fair. And I think that's what people saw in 2016. They saw that with the super delegates. They saw, and obviously some of the leaked emails associated with the DNC. How much Bernie was worked against. And again, it was a two-horse race between Bernie and Hillary. And look, I think if you don't treat everybody fairly, then it's hard to get everybody to come together in their kumbaya moments at the end. And I think that's part of the problem. So I think the biggest issue, and shame on Elizabeth Warren for trying to take her cheap shot at Sanders in that last debate. And you can't sit there and say somebody's your friend and then refuse to even shake their hand afterwards. I mean,
right, but John, I got to add something, and this is, handshakes aside, we all make peace with our people the way that we do in different ways. But let me just say right now, considering how late it is in the game for doing anything good in this country with the situation we are inheriting right now at this moment in 2020, when I think about what's available in the primaries, I'm going to be very frank with you and say that Warren's got a lot of good ideas because if you get them by their money, if you take the people who are doing the worst things and you get them by their source of money, their minds will follow. But first, you got to grab them by the, what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the approach she's taking. And it will definitely do more good for more people to approach it like that. Because we have an oligarchy right now, and it is white, and it is mean and nasty. And you know what? Taking it on from its economic element is one of the strongest ways to put things and right-size them and make this a place of more opportunity for people who have red heritage and of black heritage and of every kind of heritage. I think right now the best movement is to attack the problem from an economic level, not ideology, and I think that's what she's offering us.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the ideology still comes back to economics, and I think whether you're talking about trying to fight climate change, or whether you're talking about taxing the rich, or whether you're talking about universal health care. I mean, there's obviously a financial component to all that. So not just about paying for it, but and I don't disagree with you. And I'm not suggesting that if Warren doesn't manage to rise to the top of this pile, that the Democrats shouldn't support her. In fact, I think it's more likely, and I said this earlier, I think it's more likely that the centrists will support the progressives than the progressives will support the centrists. And at least that's what the last election showed. And so I think, I'd rather see, Warren or Sanders, rise to the top of this thing, because I think the alternative, I think, could be more divisive. But I definitely appreciate the call.
Let me just...
One more? Did we get it? Oh, did we lose him?
I'm here.
Oh, yeah. You got one more?
Yeah, one quick constructive
All right,
point.
go ahead.
If Warren or Bernie were to be elected, the one that's going to be able to hold the strongest quorum and twist elbows would be somebody that's already caucused for years within their party. That's Warren, not Bernie. And I love Bernie, and I've supported Bernie. But the fact of the matter is, when you get there and you have to twist some elbows, I think she's in a better position. That's the last thing I'll say. Thank you.
No, and again, and that's why people get to choose.
I have to note something there, is that it has been, and I was just looking at Congress.gov to prove this. It is Bernie more than Warren that have received more bipartisan support on the policies he supported. Just wanted to point that
to the
out.
caller who asked, what does Bernie push through? Look, I'm not the person you need to ask. You can go online. You go to
Congress.gov. I just saw it.
Yeah, you can find out that stuff. I mean, I don't pretend to be an authority on every politician running for office, so I'm not the right person to ask. So, and I'm not. My biggest concern is that the factionalism that that demonstrated itself in 2016 will may pave the way for a Trump victory, and I'm not crazy about that. I am by no means, even as a predictor of a possible Trump win doesn't mean that I'm rooting for it. That's for sure. So we'll see what the Democrats can get themselves together, and and see what they come up with, I guess. So we'll see. All right, caller. We may only have time for one more. We'll see what we get. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from? All right, you got you there. Can you hear me? Did we lose somebody? All right, I think we lost somebody that we had on hold, so we'll go to a different one here. Sorry if we missed you, but you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Russell out in Brighton Beach, John.
Hey, how you doing?
Okay, kiddo. Hey, Liz Warren lost me when she did that handshake thing. I would never have voted for Biden, and now I'm going to stay home if it's Liz Warren. And I think her character has deteriorated a lot lately. And some people collapse under pressure, and that's what happened to her. We'd be better off with Trump. But what we really got to worry about is if Trump and Pence are removed, the next in line is the Speaker of the House. And I think Pelosi's also collapsing. What might happen, and I think you should check this, is that you don't have to be in Congress to be the Speaker of the House. What if they pull the switcheroo and put Hillary as Speaker of the House, and all these women, and Liz Warren, and we hate Bernie because he doesn't like women. This is all a setup to put Hillary in office. Wouldn't that be a tragedy?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a long shot. And frankly, the idea of Trump or Pence being removed from office, I think, is a long shot. A lot of this is.
Oh no.
I think it's political theater. I don't see that happening. There's not the Republicans are too much aligned behind these guys. The question is who wins the next election. I think that's really what it comes down to.
John,
Yeah.
did you see this guy Lev Parnas?
Yeah, I know. But look, there's news breaking every day. I'm not saying that Trump shouldn't be removed from office. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think the guy is terrible. I mean, I think he is. He's probably one of the worst human beings. I'm not saying he's the worst president to ever serve, because Native people have had some pretty bad experiences with presidents, but he's the worst human being that has ever served in the presidency, and I don't question him. And so I saw some of the Parnas stuff. I've seen, look, the whole Giuliani thing. I mean, there's so much of this that is, and that's not even getting into his moral bankruptcy. But no, I think the guy is a terrible human being, and shame on the evangelical right, and shame on here's the thing. Yeah. If Republicans had any conscience, they could have, bridled this guy and controlled him a little bit more. They could have kept him from being as bad as he is. But, they weren't going to change his moral, bankruptcy. But, these guys just fed into it. As long as they got the Supreme Court nominees, everything else, and their tax cut, that's all they cared about.
It exposes them for what they are.
Yep.
Trump represents the rot that is at the heart of this country. But he's setting the table for Bernie Sanders and a huge victory in Congress. This country can change, but we can't accept a compromise like Liz Warren. It was 22 years ago. She was a Republican. She was 50 years old. It wasn't 50 years ago. That guy was misrepresenting, and people got to realize we'll be better off with a rotten egg like Trump. Thanks a lot, John.
Yeah, I don't know that I will ever say that the country's better off with Trump. I won't go that far. But here's what I will say. Sometimes the pendulum's got to swing in a bad place before it's going to come back out of that bad place. And I would have thought 4 years of Trump would have been swinging right hard enough.
So, John, you're saying that this country has not reached its rock bottom yet?
Well, Reggie, you and I have a lot of conversations about the failure to learn lessons, and we have it about a lot of things. But certainly the United States, that's why I opened up the song. Sometimes I'll never learn, right? That was a Murray Porter song. So I started off with.
True.
I mean, it is. Look. It's absurd to the point of laughter, and that's why we're laughing. It is absurd to the point of laughter. And when you look at some of this stuff, how it plays out. Look, that's why Saturday Night Live is in its heyday, and guys like Trevor Noah and The Daily Show. I mean, these guys have benefited immensely from the absurdity of the American,
They don't really have to write anything. They can take it verbatim.
Yeah. Well, and I have no problem coming up with something to talk about every week here, not just because of American politics, but it certainly helps. It certainly helps. Look, I want to remind people, I'm sorry if we didn't get to you. We'll do calls again next week, as we do every week. I want to remind people that I am showing a film in 2 weeks downstairs. I'm showing Indian Horse at the Brooklyn Commons. That's January 30th, Thursday, January 30th at 7 p.m. I'd love to see a big crowd come out. I haven't done an event. We usually miss December, so this will be my first event in a few months. So look forward to having a crowd come out. And you'll be moved by the film. I wasn't that familiar with the film. Somebody else suggested it to me. And I've been looking for good films that capture a little bit more of what the residential school issue was about, and this one certainly does. So come out and join me, and we'll see a good film, and we'll have a good conversation, and we'll look forward to it. I also want to remind people, support the program by becoming a WBAI buddy. Put Let's Talk with John Kane, or just Let's Talk, as the show that you're becoming a buddy in the name of, or make a one-time donation and do it in the name of Let's Talk. The money all goes to the same place. It keeps WBAI afloat. It keeps us doing what we do. But the schedules can change. I'm glad to be back to 2 hours, and if you're glad that I'm back to 2 hours and can have the time to take all the calls that we do, one good way to let the station know is make a contribution. Tell them that you support the program and you support what WBAI has done with the program. So that's my ask, and we'll get ready. We'll get ready to come back here next week. I'll take the 8.5-hour train ride, and we'll do another show next week. I look forward to it. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk. Yahweh.